Okay, so good morning everyone. Welcome to this second webinar from the Digital Assessment SIG on creating digital assessments, planning, conceptualising and supporting. We've got some brilliant speakers for you for today. But just before we go through that, I just want to go through a little bit of housekeeping, particularly for anyone who's not used to interacting with Class Collaborate. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is if you could introduce yourself and where you're from in the chat thread, which should be, if you've not got it already open, there's a little purple sliding panel on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And then in there, you'll be able to access the chat thread. If you're going to have any questions or you think of a question as we're going through presentations, please note down which presenter it is that you're aiming that question at when you add it to the chat thread. I do ask that you remain muted during presentations, please. But during the question section, if you'd prefer to unmute and ask a question, then please raise your hand and you can quite happily do it that way. And the same will be said for the lean coffee format discussion at the end. Questions for presenters will all be asked after all of the presentations have been completed. So rather than going in between each one, we'll do them all together at the end. Okay, so our agenda then for today is we're going through our welcome right now. And then we're going to start with Dr. Sida Bitalani from the University of Edinburgh, who's going to be talking about designing inclusive digital assessments with scenario-based learning. Then we have Professors Samantha Pugh and Gavin Burnell from the University of Leeds, who will be talking about enabling competency-based and programmatic assessment using digital platforms. And then we have Ben Atkinson from the University of Nottingham, who will be talking about facilitating student choice in assessment tasks in Moodle, particularly with their School of Psychology. We'll then have questions for all the speakers, and at that point, after we've completed those, the recording will stop. And we'll open up into a lean coffee format discussion on the general theme of creating digital assessments. And the reason why we stop that recording is so that you feel like you're more able to be free with what you're saying, knowing that it won't be added into any recording that would be shared on the Alt YouTube site. Okay, so let's start then with our first speaker. So Sida, when you're ready, please take it away.
Absolutely, thank you. I'll just share my screen. 2 seconds. There we go. And then mute notifications. All right, can you tell me if you can see it okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Amazing. Okay, so I'll just get started then. Good morning, everyone. Today I'll be talking to you about designing inclusive digital assessments with scenario-based learning. This presentation is going to be one that is very sort of practical leaning. So let me just sort of walk you through the talk structure. So first, I'll explain to you a bit about me. Who am I, basically? Where am I coming from to this challenge, let's say? And then I'll get into the challenge, what we're trying to create. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about how I worked with the lecturers who came up with this idea for an assessment that needs to be inclusive, etc. And then I will get into a bit more practical sort of concerns or what I do when I'm working with AI type of details. Just so you know, there's a lot of confusion around AI, like how do we use these large language models? Like, is this good for us? Is this bad for us? So like I wanted to give a bit of a practical sort of outlook to what we can do as learning technologists with these large language models. And then I'll show you a sort of prototype of like how I've worked through this assessment model on Storyline. I have sort of like a proof of concept prototype that I can show you. and then I'll move on to my next steps and takeaways from this process. So, who am I? I'm Seda Battilani. I have a bachelor's degree and PhD in language education, TESOL specifically. My interests are multilingualism, co-learning, learning outside of the classroom, any sort of pedagogical innovation, really. And then I have a master's in applied linguistics, which kind of helped me a little bit, not so much, but a little bit with large language models and kind of how they work. I guess it made me a bit more receptive to it, if that makes sense. Throughout my PhD, I was a tutor and briefly a lecturer in language education, linguistics, sociology. And then towards the end of my PhD, I actually went into the learning and organizational development industry, where I used a lot of articulate storyline or articulate rise. So that's where the sort of storyline side comes from. And finally, very recently, I've moved into professional services at the University of Edinburgh. So I've only been in this role for like just over a year. So this is where I'm coming from to this, basically. So the challenge, what we were trying to do is this thing that the University of Edinburgh is launching called challenge courses. So these are 5, if I remember, if I'm correct, it could be also 6, I'm not, sorry, new or revamped optional courses. They are open to all first and second year undergraduate students. The idea is, creating collaboration and interdisciplinarity across any sort of school within the university. And they are much more focused on principles of accessibility and inclusivity, right? And within these 5 courses, the course that I'm going to be talking about is a course that's called Sustainable Development Goals, History, Progress, and Beyond 2030. So this course has already been running for 2 years. And right now, this year, in its cohort, it has like 45 students. But as part of this challenge courses thing that the University of Edinburgh is doing, the numbers are projected to be 200 students in the next academic year and then 400 students in the academic year after that. So you can imagine numbers changing this much can have a big effect on how we want to change assessments. So that's why we needed to have assessment sessions with the lecturers who are already running these courses to see, okay, what can we do about this? Like, clearly we will need to change our assessment, because as it stands, it's like a long essay, and 200, 400 long essays can be quite the deal, basically. So one of the lecturers on the course had this brilliant idea of simulating a citizens' assembly, and I'll get to what it is in a second, but let me just tell you the objective of this sort of form, and this is envisioned as a formative assessment. The objective would be students engaging in a simulated citizens' assembly and then deliberate on the University of Edinburgh's good food policy. And throughout this, what we aim for them to do is students examine policy feasibility and potential impact on achieving sustainable development goals. On the right hand side of the screen, you will see what I'm talking about, sustainable development goals. So from there, we needed to actually, sorry, let me take a detour. What is a citizens' assembly, right? So a citizens' assembly is a representative forum where a diverse group of community members come together, deliberate on policy issues, and provide recommendations. There are 4 steps to a citizens' assembly, and this is all coming from the lecture at this point. So the first stage, you set a question, participants review the policy documents, and then they form a question. The second stage is the learning stage, where participants engage with expert presentations, ask them questions. This is what happens in real life in a citizens' assembly, right? And then deliberation, participants discuss that information they just learned from experts, and then finally they arrive at a decision. What concerns us for this presentation is the learning stage, okay? So the idea from the lectures was, okay, we want our students to be able to speak to experts, but we want this to be as sort of inclusive, accessible as possible. We want this to be possibly something that students can engage in their own time, ask a bunch of questions. So the initial idea, of course, that the lecturers came to me with is, can we train AI chatbots like that students can speak to? But then, of course, they were also mindful of the environmental impact of it, right? I mean, we're talking about sustainable development goals. If we're going to have an AI chatbot, we there is a serious sustainability question there that we don't have all the answers to at the moment when we were talking about this. And the other big problem, of course, was the time scale. Training an AI chatbot takes a lot of effort, and there are various projects at the university that are already doing this at the moment, but they will not be ready by any time that this course is supposed to run, like at least not for the first year. So that's where my role came in, and I had to sort of talk to lecturers and be like, okay, I understand your vision, but just because we have certain constraints doesn't mean that we can't work with them. As you can see, this red part on the screen. Okay, yes, having certain constraints will restrain and impede what we're trying to do, but at the same time, it can enable and advance a creative course, such as a design process. And that's what I try to emphasize. I understand what we're trying to do. We want students to be able to talk to experts, like these models, but that doesn't mean it has to be the exact same simulation of a real life scenario. A good learning design activity will be able to achieve its learning objectives without those extra steps as well. This comes down to the idea of like, there's this allure of AI, like, oh, can it do everything instead of us? Can it do, these very intricate stuff? And that's the sort of idea where I wanted to say, my role as someone who's planning this activity is still very central to how AI is being used in that activity. So explaining all of this to the lecturers, I told them I will make a proof of concept prototype for you on Storyline for an alternative way of engaging with experts, right? And this is where I get more practical. So in terms of creating expert personas, I used University of Edinburgh's own large language model. And in this large language model, you have prompts and documents that you can choose. So you can create a prompt and you can have some documents uploaded onto it, which Elm supports. So what do I mean when I'm talking about when I say creating a prompt? This is how I went into creating a prompt, and I cannot stress this enough. Have a long AI prompting document. So on the screen, you can see an example of how I started my prompt. So I started with software and development needs. I told this Elm, the large language model, I'm going to detail a teaching activity for you. It needs to be storyline friendly. Whatever output you give me, please give it to me in a way where you're considering that this is going to ultimately go into storyline. This is how you're supposed to write personas. The other sections I had this in this document were, okay, what is the assessment? What is a citizens assembly? What the teaching activity is supposed to be like? Background information on the course that is running, the SDGs, history of SDGs. The beautiful part of AI prompting is that it can genuinely process so much information that you will not be able to process. You just need to give it the right sort of skeleton. You need to give it the right framework to think in. And the document I selected was the University of Edinburgh's Good Food Policy, like what the students were supposed to discuss. So now I'm going to show you a few examples of what I do when I'm working with AI prompting. So as soon as I put that long prompt document, which is usually a lot of pages on Word as a Word document, the first thing I will ask is, do you have any questions about your prompt? And this has been so helpful. So immediately as I put my prompt, you can see on the screen, it asks me a bunch of questions: number and range of personas, what kind of depth, what kind of detail do you want? Like, should I go into background? Should I go into specific challenges? It's asking me questions that I hadn't considered as well. So that's a very good way of sort of working with this thing, basically. Another way that I found AI prompting very helpful is more guidance or honing in specific points in my learning activity. So here it's talking about a score that I was going to keep, and as you can see my response here, like, I like this in theory, but what about if we had 4 perspectives instead of 1, which is what you suggested to me. And ultimately, I worked on this with the AI a bit more and created that 4 different perspective system, which I'll get to. Another thing that I found very helpful is it helps me try out various setups so quickly. So I can ask Elm, the LLM, how would this work on Storyline? Like, give me a branching for this. Like, does this work well, do you think? And then it gives me all these setups, and I can decide on, instead of running each setup on Storyline, I can just decide on which one makes more sense by running a few iterations on Elm, basically, which was super helpful. So these are just some of the examples. Obviously, I'm already over time, so I don't want to get into too much detail, but if you're curious about it, please drop me an email. You'll see at the end the email. But the prototype I created, as you can see on the screen, is a branching scenarios where they're talking to 3 experts. And the way I've sort of made this, instead of having a chatbot where there's like a lot of open options, I've changed how the sort of teaching activity is supposed to be. So instead of having these like open-ended questions, what happens is we've given a constraint on the students to ask. They can only ask a certain number of questions, and depending on which questions they've chosen, the feedback gives them, hey, these are some policy areas that you might have not considered very much. As you can see in your results, you haven't really focused on measurable targets in policymaking. So this is an area that you need to improve in, So it's all about sort of changing the activity to fit into your constraints, and that's how we went into this. So what you see on the screen is the prototype. Moving from this, my takeaways and next steps. What I want to say is the starting point for any of these activities, we keep talking about, AI, LLM, how do we use this? What do we do? The starting point will always have to be grounded in pedagogical expertise, because there are always creative constraints that will need creative solutions. The role of AI within this, for me, has been creating a structure by analyzing large amounts of information. It's been very helpful for me in that sense. Running certain tests, like, should I word this way? Should I use this way? Some troubleshooting. Whenever I had some trouble on Storyline, I could easily ask it to help me where I was going wrong. Some comparison of scenarios. I can give it very intricate scenarios and say, what do you think about this? Like, from a teaching point of view, am I missing anything, right? Brainstorming as well. And testing comprehensibility of my own work. Like, I created this thing. Do you think it works? So in a way, I use it as a sort of way of expanding my own thoughts, if that makes sense. And this is where I think my role has been the liaison. So I have been the person who created that link between the lecturer's vision and what is possible with our current digital capabilities. And finishing up, what are the next steps? The next steps are basically fleshing out the writing for each persona with the lecturer's input. So while I started with AI to flesh out a bunch of things, obviously I will have to go back to SME, like subject matter experts, because that's where I will get all the good writing. At the end, we will have to still design this ourselves. But I have saved so much time and effort by doing the initial planning stages on LLM, if that makes sense. So from here, we will be filling in step-by-step interaction branches, and we're planning to roll this out by the end of 2025. So that's me. Please don't hesitate to contact me for further information. It was really hard to fit all the information in one place. I have more guidance or help if you're curious about learning more. There's my email address. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Cedar. So as I said before, please save questions until the very end, and then we'll bring them all together and everyone can have a chance to look. If you have any ideas of something that you want to ask as you're watching individual presentations, please feel free to just pop them in the chat thread. We will go through them to make sure that we capture everybody. So next we've got Professor Samantha Pugh. And do you have Professor Gavin Brunel with you today, Samantha? Oh, you are muted, Samantha.
So no, I'm afraid not, because he's teaching. So it's just me. I'll just try to share my window. Oh, God. Hang on. Oh Lord, I think you might have to share my slides. The university's rather unhelpful lockdown policies and what
That's okay. I'll share your slides for you. Just
sorry
tell me
about
when
that.
you're
Yeah,
ready.
it's like change your settings. No, you need to be an administrator. So like that's not going to work. Okay, thanks, Gemma.
There we are.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so what I'd like to do today is share the work we've done in physics at the University of Leeds, where we've enabled competency-based and programmatic assessment, really through the use of digital platforms. Okay, next slide, please. So what we've done is we've completely revamped our program, so I'll say a little bit about that. Then I'll talk about how we've changed assessment, what we mean when we say competency-based programmatic assessment, and then look at the technological solutions that have allowed us to implement that, and then a few conclusions. Okay. So at the University of Leeds, we've had a huge institution-wide programme called Curriculum Redefined, and we were all sort of challenged to redefine our courses and redesign them. So we took this really seriously as a school, and we decided we wanted to completely overhaul what we were doing. It also aligned nicely with the timing of the Institute of Physics changing their accreditation requirements. So it really gave us an opportunity to be creative. So this is the new structure that we have, and it's useful just to share this. So we identified we've got 100 credits of core, which we see as 100 credits, although strictly speaking, it is split up into 20 credit units, but it is certainly assessed as 100 credits. And this contains all our maths, physics, computing and experimental, but integrated, the way that it should be. So we really want students to stop seeing them as separate subjects and as one integrated whole. And then in second year, we do the same with 80, and then we have program specific. And then as we get into the third and fourth year, I would say our changes are less drastic. And so what I'm going to do today is focus on year one, because that's where we're up to at the moment, and that helps me to explain what we're doing. Okay, next slide, please. So we have had a number of issues with assessments, particularly around sort of success and what I'd call like unexpected failures. So we see students that appear to be doing fine throughout the year and then just crash out in the summative assessments at the end. So this is largely the sort of design which is low stakes coursework throughout the year for most of the taught modules, usually around 10 to 20%, which often leads to low engagement, and then finding it difficult also to build synoptic assessments. So we really want to focus on having a much more synoptic approach, but if you're split up into these smaller units, the cross-fertilization of topics, it becomes quite difficult. So we also had problems. We had some bigger modules, but then we also co-taught with joint honours. So the idea of making it synoptic was quite difficult, just because not everybody was getting the same thing. And then we also have these sort of summative high stakes single point of failure assessments, which were a huge source of stress and anxiety for our students, and we were seeing that coming through. And also the other sort of, well, I always think it's the elephant in the room. If your pass mark's 40%, then students can get through the degree with not knowing 60% of the content. And that felt like a bit of a problem as well. So we couldn't really, hand on heart, say that students had met all the learning outcomes, and I don't think anyone can if the pass mark is 40%. So that was something we wanted to tackle as well. Okay. So what we wanted to do was focus on a threshold-based assessment. So we didn't want to use the term competency because of the potential confusion with competence standards, and having a very specific legal meaning within the Equality Act. So we came up with an acronym, or I should say Gavin came up with an acronym, which was a verifiable indicator of threshold abilities and learning, which has the nice vitals as its acronym. And this has become the sort of terminology of our school now in terms of student achievement. Okay, next slide. So how is this put into practice? So we define each vital. So the vitals are very similar to learning outcome, but they might be a little bit more at a more specific level than a learning outcome. So it might be that you know how to solve problems using forces in mechanics, whereas the learning outcome might be you know how to solve mechanics problems. Then we assess those throughout the course during the year, and I'll move on to how we're doing that in a moment. Each of these vitals is assessed multiple times, so there's multiple opportunities for students to pass them. And then it requires students to achieve all of these vitals at least once. So they don't have to pass every single assessment, but they do have to have got the sort of patchwork of all these vitals. And when they've passed all those, they have what we describe as a safety net of a minimal pass. So they're guaranteed a 40% floor on their module mark. The reason we do that is because we say they have met all the learning outcomes. But obviously we need to then differentiate. So we then have students taking grading assessments at the end of the year, which is to allow them to access the full range of marks. But even if they do badly in that, they can't go below 40%. So it does give them a real sort of peace of mind as they're going into those final assessments. And hopefully by removing some of that stress, it will help them to actually achieve better and perform better. So students who don't achieve the vitals would need to retake the module. Okay, next slide. So we have, for our grading assessments at the end, I'll talk about that first because it's a bit simpler, is we have terminal exams. So these are open book. So we've been operating open book pretty much since the pandemic anyway, and they are drawing on all the different topics, and there's written-based exams and also a computer-based exam. And then there's also a portfolio which is drawn from the laboratory reports and the computing assignments that they've been completing throughout the year. I'm not going to focus on that today, but that's a whole other talk probably to talk about how we build this portfolio. Okay, next slide. So our implementation, we're almost through year one, and it's been an interesting journey, but I think it's pretty much worked as we'd hoped it would. So we have a weekly quiz that covers up to 4 vitals. So it would normally be 20 questions per quiz, so 5 questions from each vital. And students have to, as I say, pass all the vitals to pass the year. And the pass mark for the quiz is 16 out of 20. So that guarantees they've got at least 1 question right from each set in order to achieve that pass mark. Okay, next slide. So we have this matrix approach. So this is just sort of illustrating how we mapped it out throughout the year. So you can see the crosses represent which of the vitals are in each of the quizzes. And so we do have some duplication. So everything's appeared at least twice, and some of the earlier ones appear a little more often just because in the early days you don't have as many to build the quizzes with. Okay, next slide. So we have 2 software solutions to deliver this. One is using Mobius, which is a quizzing tool that is particularly good for mathematics. So it allows us to input mathematical expressions as the answers, and it allows us to create variables within the question. So this means that we have an extremely large number of variants of the questions. So, for example, if you imagine you had a question that had 2 variables, and each variable could have 10 different points, so it might be between 1 and 10, that allows you 100 variants of that question. So it very quickly starts to scale up how many different questions we have. So the way we've built it this year is we said we have 10 questions in each set, and then we draw 5 each time a student completes the quiz. And that's linked via LTI to our VLE, which is Blackboard. And then the second part is what we call the Vitals website. So this was a in-house built system that Gavin created. So very fortunate to have someone that has expertise in creating sort of web interface databases essentially. And this maps those quizzes and the vitals to together, and then it shows that to the students. So it shows the student progress through the vitals, so they get a view that shows them if they passed the quiz or not, and then also which of the vitals that means they've then passed. And there's student view, tutor view, and then there's also a sort of master view, administrator view, so people like the Director of Student Education or the student support team can see everybody. Okay, next slide. So this is what Mobius looks like. So as you can see, we've created lots of baskets of questions, and then we draw. So we create 4 baskets to create our quiz. I'll go on to the next slide, please. This is what a question might look like. So you can see where you've got those $A and $B, they're the variables, and then the answer will be an expression that includes those variables, but the student is asked to put in the numerical answer to the question. So the formula you see there is what actually goes in the answer behind the scenes, and then that will calculate by inserting the numbers that it's selected, and you can see the set of parameters that were in that question. But the nice thing about this is you don't need to be a coder to create questions. I am not a coder. It uses a similar syntax to what you might use in an Excel spreadsheet. So I'm certainly learning bits of coding through doing this, but I don't need to be a coder in order to implement it, which is really nice. So we've tended to have a model where I've input most of the questions, and then a couple of my colleagues have kind of quality checked those. Although we're now starting to encourage staff to input their own questions. But in the early days, we didn't really know how to use it ourselves, so it felt like the best option was to have one person inputting everything whilst we learned the system. But as we go forward, people will be able to be sort of trained in how to do them themselves. It's not particularly difficult, it's just when you don't know yourself, you can't really explain it to someone else. Okay, next slide. So a few things about things. So we build our quizzes using these groups of questions. We set it to unlimited attempts, and this is a really important principle of what we're doing. So competency-based assessment means you don't have to get it right first time. It's you keep doing it until you can do it. So we have set it as unlimited attempts on all the quizzes, and we've also built in one "how did I do" option, and this just allows people to just check they haven't made a syntax error in the answer, or a silly mistake. There is some debate about how many times "how did I do" we set, but we've gone with 1 this year. And then at the end of the quiz, they're told which questions they got correct and incorrect, and whether they've passed or not. And then after semester 1, we did change a setting to allow students to keep the right answers, because otherwise it was getting quite hard work and frustrating for them. And I think we had some debate about, well, you should just keep doing it until you can achieve it. But if someone kept getting 15 out of 20, that felt really harsh. So we decided to build in saving correct answers, and that seems to have gone down quite well with the students. Okay, next slide, please. So this is our Vitals website. So this is what the progress looks like. So each of these lines represents a student. I've obviously hidden the student name. So we can see on the left-hand side, you can see whether they've passed the homeworks and with what score. And then on the right-hand side, you can see which of the vitals they've passed. So this gives a really good overview. The student will see their own, and then the tutor can see each of their usually 5 tutees, and then the sort of leadership can see all of it. Okay, next slide, please. So I think I just wanted to touch on some of the challenges we've had with being innovative. So we found that module sizes and program level design weren't really compatible. And so we've had to find some sort of clever workarounds within Banner to make this possible. Things around resit rules and attempts. So this idea that you keep doing it until you pass is not really in the spirit of how you would normally view resitting, but we saw it more as practicing until you achieved it. The student record system, again, Banner not necessarily set up to work in this way, but we've had some really supportive colleagues that have helped make this possible. Similarly with program and module catalogues. And also governance. So we had an institution initiative to really think creatively, but then some of the who actually gets to say yes to your innovation is not necessarily clear. So there's some of the challenges to overcome. Okay, next slide. So in conclusion, I would say that changing course and changing assessment structures go hand in hand. So hence why we did it all in one go. we wanted to ensure that all students could meet all the learning outcomes, and we believe that we've done that. We've yet to see what happens in the end of year assessment. We have removed that high pressure, high stakes assessments. We've a lot more opportunities to succeed now. It's decoupling progression from the final mark, which was something we were keen to do. And it really is the technology that have made this approach possible. Without the sort of ability to sort of change questions in the way I've described, you know, you couldn't do this by human marking. It would be, you know, it would be far too much time and effort. It just wouldn't be possible. So it's allowed students to kind of pace their own learning and sort of keep attempting things until they succeed. Okay, thank you very much.
There we go. Thank you, Samantha. That's really, really helpful. Again, if you do have any questions for Samantha, please do feel free to pop them in the chat, and we'll come to them all at the end whenever all the presentations are finished. So thank you very much. And I believe we have Ben next.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, great. So you can see my presentation?
Yep, all there.
Perfect. I've got some video later on, so let's hope that audio works as well. We did test it earlier on. Okay, great. So thank you very much for all joining this morning. There's a great number of people here. I'm going to talk about the student choice pilot that we ran in our School of Psychology at the University of Nottingham in the first semester of this academic year. Just to start off with a little bit about me, I'm the Learning Technology Consultant for the Faculty of Science at Nottingham. Been in that role for a couple of years now. Previously was a Digital Education Developer, Read Learning Technologist at Lincoln for the College of Arts for 5 years. My background, I have a BA and MA in Media and Digital Media and a PGCHE in Blended Learning and Distance Learning. And I am just also in the final months of writing up my PhD in musicology. So that's different, don't ask, long story, and a fellow of the HEA working on my senior fellowship at the moment. Okay, a little about the School of Psychology at Nottingham. So it's one of the largest schools in the Faculty of Science, and the Faculty of Science is one of our larger faculties, apart from medicine, which I think is the biggest. Roughly 1,000 students on our UK university campus. We have campuses also in China and Malaysia, but this pilot focused on the UK campus. And there are about 50 modules that run across all programs in the School of Psychology at Nottingham. The largest of those modules has around 400 to 450 students on it. So you can imagine very large, big cohorts of students across many modules in this big school. But for this pilot, we were able to find a module that had about 250 students. So it was not the smallest and not the biggest, but it was a bit more manageable in terms of running the pilot here. So what did we want to do with this? What problem were we trying to solve? So a little about the scope now of the pilot. Theoretical background to this. Basically, we wanted to put the choice of the assessment task in the hands of the student. Kind of was already there, but only in about 50% of the project of the task was done by the students. The other half was manual. We wanted to solve that problem. So Connor outlines the case for this and describes how students are capable self-regulated learners who would benefit from greater assignment submission flexibility. I think we can all agree with that. It's just how you achieve that within the VLE, in our case Moodle, which I'll go on to describe a bit. In our pilot, there was already some flexibility around this. So for 5-6 years in the school, there were already choices for students. They had 5 topics that they could choose from for their final summative essay. But it was a really messy way of doing this. They had 5 drop boxes. They had many columns in the grade book. Accumulating all those grades at the end of the module was really hard to do, and it took hours of work to mark and to the administration of this. So how could we make that easier within our school and deliver this choice automated, ideally, for the students within Moodle? And if possible, we also wanted to add some additional benefits there, such as automated marking groups to make the marking process quicker and easier, and also to resolve some issues for the administrators, which were around the ability to enable ECs and student plans and all this sort of stuff that traditionally was quite hard to do. So overall, the initial problem was that there were many large cohort modules in the School of Psychology. We wanted to run this pilot that we would then hopefully be moving out into the wider school and expanding. The summative assessments in the school were often taken by hundreds of students in one go, 200 students or even 400 students in some cases. There's often a choice of topics for the final assessment, up to 5 questions, and with different tutors marking different questions, and no way to easily identify the groups, right? You could download a list of students from Moodle and you could create your groups in Excel, re-upload them, but all of that is a very burdensome process, and oftentimes the spreadsheet would get rejected and you have to start all over again. It isn't quick, it isn't automated, and there's an opportunity for making mistakes in there. And we also wanted to reduce the administrative burden. So what have we tried in the past? Prior to me joining Nottingham, we tried many things over the years. Moodle Choice activity and the sign-up sheet activity, both of which, if you use Moodle, you'll know you can it's open source, so you can build your own activities and add them into the Moodle sort of platform. And sign-up sheets is one of those, developed at Nottingham, but available for anybody to use. Essentially, these 3 things, form, choice activity, sign-up sheet, all did the same thing. They did automate the choice. It gave students a list of topics, and they could choose which one they wanted. It gave us an output of 10 students want to do this essay, 20 want to do that essay, but it didn't do anything else. So it did half the task. It helped us to work out who wanted to do what, but it didn't automate any of the group's creation or any of that stuff. So there was still a couple of hours of administrative tasks to upload and create and make this work. And then you had to do the same thing at the end when you had to accumulate all those individual columns into one column for exporting it into the final mark system. So the answer for us lay in Moodle groups. Here's a beautiful picture of the University of Lausanne, I'm going to pronounce that wrong, in Switzerland. If you have a view like that from your campus, you're definitely going to be inspired to make a nice Moodle plugin. And that's exactly what this person, Nicholas Duan, did. Developed a plugin called Moodle Group Choice. I did a bit of testing with various different plugins within Moodle to see what would work best for us. And again, if you use Moodle, you'll know that a lot of the process here is being quite creative. So it's using the plugins you have in creative ways to do different things. And you can kind of achieve anything in that way. So we use this plugin Group Choice, aligned with a move from Turnitin to a Moodle assignment rather than sticking with Turnitin. Turnitin has some restrictions, particularly around the ability to give extended deadlines for ECs and study plans. You can't do that in Turnitin. If you're late, whether you're late on purpose or late because you actually have an extension. So we wanted to have some more nuance there, and we did that with a Moodle assignment. There were 2 strands to this pilot then. There was the assessment strand, where basically we used the group choice activity, a new plugin within Moodle, to allow students to opt into their choice of topic. And by doing that, it created some groups for them with the students in them automatically. We then used release conditions to ensure that the students completed that step, i.e. put themselves in a group before they were able to submit to one Dropbox that was created rather than the original 5 Dropboxes within Moodle. And we used the term Dropbox to mean a Moodle assignment. These automated groups were then later used to do the marking, because academics could go in and select the topic of the essay that they themselves were marking and see all the students that had taken that essay. And on the administration side, this move from a Moodle Dropbox away from Turnitin allowed the option of adjusting the due date for individual students, which previously was not possible within Turnitin. And that aligned with the policies in the school, whereby students would request their EC and then the administrators would go in and apply that within the assignment. And they couldn't do that previously within Turnitin. And this taken together all gives some time and efficiencies, saving a lot of time across the whole project. So we are a learning technology sort of webinar here. So I thought I would just show you how this works. This is how it's set up and what you would do within Moodle to make this sort of pilot work. As you can see here on this screen, I have a summative essay submission. This is a simple Moodle Dropbox which is set up and ready to accept submissions. What I first need to do is go to the top of my site, go to the participants section and look for my groups, which are within the sub menu. Now what you'll see in here is I have 2 groups that were set up previously for another purpose. I'm not going to use those in this example. I'm going to create some new groups. I'm going to create 3 groups. So if I go straight to create group, I'm going to name this group for the title of the essay. So this is going to be essay topic 1.
And then you could put a description in. I won't for this example. The most important setting you need to remember is this one down here, group membership visibility. Now, if you don't have this set to visible or only visible to members, one of those top two options, then it won't work for the filtering of the marks at the end of this process. That's an important step that we learned through this pilot. So I'm going to say visible and ensure that the group visibility is turned on. And then I'm going to hit Save Changes. That's all I'm doing here, making a group with no members called Essay Topic 1. So I now have 3 empty groups for each of my topics, one for each of my topics for this particular assessment. So if I go back to my module and I go back to my group choice pilot topic, what I'm now going to do is add an activity or resource. And within Moodle, I'm going to search for group choice. Here it is. So I select group choice, and then you would put in here the title of your choice activity. So in this case, I'm going to say choose the topic for your final assessment. You could put a description again in here. This would be the wording around the topic of the essay, any instructions the students would need to be aware of. We have quite a lot of settings within the group choice plugin. The one I'm most interested in is down here, where we are going to select, and you can see that the groups that I've just created that are empty, that I haven't used before, are over here. So I'm going to add each group from the left to the right to show that I want to use these 3 essay topic groups as the titles for my essays that students are going to opt into, choosing one of those 3 options. So do I want to publish the results to students? And I'm not going to publish the results to students because I don't want them to necessarily know which other students are doing the same essay topic as them. Do I want to allow the choice to be updated? Well, no, because once they've selected their essay title, we don't want to then have them change that halfway through the process. Do we want to show a column for unanswered? And again, no, we want them to choose one of the 3 options, not to have an optional no at the end of that. Okay, so what I'm now going to do is set up the release conditions to ensure that the essay only appears, the submission Dropbox only appears when the student has selected the topic that they want to choose. And what you will now see is that the summative essay submission box is not going to be available to any students unless they have completed the choice of topic in here. So how this works is that a student, as we'll see in a minute, a student will make a choice and then the Dropbox will become available to them. And in doing that, the students are in a group, and although they are all submitting to the same single Dropbox rather than 3 individual Dropboxes, it's fine because they're in a group and we can use the filter later on to filter those students out when marking happens.
So that's how it is set up. And
As you can see here on this,
hopefully here, this is how it works on the student side.
So as a student, you would scroll down to where the assessment is, and as you can see, it tells you that it's not available unless you have completed the choose a topic for your final assessment activity. And it says you have to do that up here. So we hit this, and as a student, we are presented with 3 different options. These would normally be the titles of the essay. So as this student, I'm going to choose essay topic number 3. I'm then going to say save my choice. Very simply, that shows that my choice has been made. I've completed the activity. I cannot do anything else here. So I'm going to go back to the module. I'm going to scroll back down, and I'm going to see now that that message has gone, and I can go in here and I can add my submission. Hitting save changes, and I have now submitted my file for grading. So as a student...
Okay, great. I've got a couple of minutes, so hopefully I'll go through some of the lessons learned from this. Just on the admin side, as you can see here, there is an option within a Moodle assignment, I've mentioned this, to go in and grant an extension for individual students. So that is not something you can do in Turnitin. That was another additional benefit, not originally part of the pilot, but really was a good benefit we had out of this, because then students who may have a few days or a week's longer submission deadline can get their extensions individually, which was causing real problems with 200 students on a Turnitin and so many of them marked in red. If they're late, it's very hard to differentiate who is really late and who actually had an extension. So the outcome of the pilot is that it ran across 2 large cohort modules in the School of Psychology in autumn of last year. It worked out as planned, and it automated the process of choosing a topic. All the students submitted to one Moodle Dropbox, and the marking groups were automatically created by question. We had really no problems with the academics. We didn't hear back from them actually till the end of the pilot, which is a good sign. You know, if we'd have had problems, we would have had lots of questions from the academic team. It went without a hitch, which was great. Manual overrides were introduced to capture any student mistakes in the way that I've described, and the ECs were able to be moderated more easily. So it worked really, really well. I know it's quite a straightforward and simple approach, but what's really great about this, as I said earlier, is it's quite creative. So you've got now the ability to put students into groups by their own choice. That's used for assessment, but it could also be used for lots of other things, you know, different choices of pathway within a module if you use adaptive release, or, you know, focus groups, whatever it might be. And I'm running out of time, so final slide here, what the next steps will be. We're currently evaluating the success of this pilot, but it does suggest that the approach greatly reduced the administrative burden. Students found it a really good approach. Feedback from the academic team suggested that there was a little bit of loss of functionality because they really liked using the quick marks within Turnitin Feedback Studio, and you don't get that in Moodle. So that's one thing we'll be working on, you know, which is the better platform overall, and what wins out, you know, the ability to mark in a different way or the administrative burden there is something we need to look at. And we're going to look at rolling this out to a wider range of modules in the School of Psychology and hopefully to the wider university as well. There's my details if you want to contact me, and if you want to find out more about our team at Nottingham, there's a link tree there with some information for you too.
Brilliant, thank you. It's really, really interesting. In fact, really interesting from everyone today. If anyone has any questions, can we please pop those into the chat? I have noticed we've got a couple for Samantha. Unfortunately, Samantha's had to just step out for a moment and won't be back until we're in the next stage of the webinar. So I will ask her to, when she comes back in, respond to those within the chat thread so that you do get an answer. Just, has anyone got any particular questions for either Cedar or Ben at all? As well, if you prefer to ask it in person, feel free to just raise your hand and I can and we can unmute you. Okay. While we're waiting, I think I've got one. I'd really love to know in just a little bit more detail from either yourself, Ben, or from Cedar, what the feedback with students was on both of your assessments.
Yes, I can just speak real quick on that if you'd like. I think, in a sense, feedback from the students was limited because this was more of an administrative pilot behind the scenes. So from the student perspective, I think the lack of feedback was a good thing because it showed that they didn't have a change to their approach. From their point of view, it was very quick and easy to do this. I think they liked the option of being able to see quite clearly in Moodle how they would progress. So they made a choice and then they saw the submission drop box. They didn't have 5. Prior to doing this pilot, we had quite a few problems with students submitting to the wrong drop box because they were confused as to which of the 5 they should use. So in that sense, it was really great because it streamlined the process. They went through, they made a choice. They couldn't then change their choice unless they contacted the admin team to make that change. And then they submitted to the one drop box. So essentially, there was very little chance that they would make a mistake. So that reduced the number of queries they had to send in. And I think it was a more straightforward process for the students. That's the initial feedback that we got.
Brilliant, thank you. Cedar, we've had a question come in for you as well. So this is from Dan at KCL. With your long prompting document for ELM, did you find there were any limitations in terms of the context window for the tool? He says he often finds that longer prompts sometimes lose details as earlier details are forgotten or supplanted by later interactions with the tool. So if you could comment on that.
Absolutely. No, that's a great question. And I've had similar problems before as well. So I think here, my luck basically is that I'm using the university's own LLM, and it is constantly being updated to reflect more changes. So at its current iteration, it has a memory for whatever chat that you're like within every chat, it has the memory of whatever we've spoken within that chat, basically, which is not the case for every single LLM, to be fair. But despite that, I still have some problems with that sort of thing. What I do is, again, sort of treating it like a not so smart colleague. So like just saying, hey, like bringing it back to the point that I really wanted to hone in on. Sorry. And one thing that I found very helpful in this case is asking my questions very, like, in a very sort of defined and small chunks, if that makes sense, because I found, exactly like you said, whenever I give a very sort of broad or like, write me this long thing based on your prompt, it will inevitably skip over a lot of things, basically. So what I found is systematically chunking my questions for it and trying to go through them step by step, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Great. So thank you very much to all of our presenters today. We're going to move on to our lean coffee format discussion. So I'm going to stop the recording so that we've got the freedom to talk.